Welcome. You found your way here, and that is exactly where you are supposed to be. Maybe you came looking for sleep. Maybe you came looking for quiet. Maybe you simply needed somewhere to put your mind for a little while that wasn't the news, the notifications, the endless motion of a world that never quite seems to stop and catch its breath. Whatever brought you here, you are welcome. Pull up a hammock. The island has been waiting. Over the next 2.5 hours, we are going to take you somewhere warm. A tropical island. A hammock strung between two coconut palms. The sound of the ocean doing what it has always done, breathing in, breathing out, pulling at the shore with the quiet authority of the moon behind it. We will spend a full day there together, from the first soft gold of morning all the way through the star-filled night and back to sunrise again, and along the way we will share 100 of the most fascinating, surprising, and quietly wonderful facts about the world this island is made of. The palm trees that survived the dinosaurs. The tides governed by a moon 250,000 miles away. The starfish moving on 1,000 tiny feet through warm, clear pools, ancient and unhurried and perfectly at home. This is not a video that asks anything of you. There is nothing to remember, nothing to achieve, no quiz waiting at the end. Just a story, told slowly, in a place designed by nature itself for exactly this, for lying still, for breathing deeply, for letting the world be as extraordinary and as peaceful as it actually is when you give it your full and undivided attention. So find your most comfortable position. Let your shoulders drop. Close your eyes if you like, the island sounds just as beautiful in the dark. The hammock is ready. The ocean is waiting. Let's begin. Imagine, for a moment, that you have nowhere to be. No alarm. No deadline. No noise pressing in from every direction. Just the slow, warm exhale of a world that has been doing this, just this, for millions of years. The sun hangs low and golden over the water. Somewhere behind you, the palm fronds are moving, not because anything is urgent, but because the breeze simply decided to pass through. And you are lying in a hammock, strung between two trees that were old before your grandparents were born, suspended in that perfect, weightless place between waking and dreaming. This is the tropical island. And it has been waiting for you. Let's begin here, at the very start of things, before the facts and the science and the wonder, let's begin with the feeling. Because that feeling, that deep, cellular exhale you get the moment you settle into a hammock and feel the world tilt gently beneath you. There is actually a reason for it. A real, physiological reason. The gentle swaying motion of a hammock activates the vestibular system in your inner ear, the same system responsible for your sense of balance, and that subtle, rhythmic stimulation has been shown to synchronize brain waves, nudging your mind away from the alert, anxious frequencies of waking life and toward the slower, more peaceful waves associated with deep relaxation and even sleep. Scientists at the University of Geneva found that people rocked gently while resting not only fell asleep faster, but experienced deeper, more restorative sleep cycles. So when you close your eyes in that hammock and feel the tension leave your shoulders like water running off a leaf, that isn't laziness. That is your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do. And what better place to let it happen than here, beneath a canopy of palms? Look up. Really look. The palm tree swaying above you is one of the most ancient and extraordinary plants on the face of the earth. The palm family, known scientifically as Ericaceae, contains over 2,600 individual species, and fossil records show that palms have been growing on this planet for at least 80 million years, meaning they were already here, already reaching toward the sun, long before the first humans ever took a breath. They survived the extinction event that wiped out the dinosaurs. They have watched entire civilizations rise and fall from the shores of their islands. And yet here they are, still swaying, still growing, still dropping their fronds in that slow, unhurried rhythm that seems to say, there is no rush. There never was. The particular palm most likely shading your hammock on a tropical island is the coconut palm, Cocos nucifera, and it carries a distinction unlike almost any other tree in the world. It is often called the tree of life across dozens of Pacific and South Asian cultures, and the title is well earned. Nearly every single part of the coconut palm has a practical use: the roots, the trunk, the fronds, the husk, the shell, the flesh, the water, the oil. Ancient Pacific Islander communities built homes from its timber, wove the fronds into roofing and baskets, made rope from the fibrous husk, called coir, and drank the clear, sweet water inside the young coconut as a source of hydration during long ocean voyages. The coconut palm didn't just make tropical island life comfortable. For thousands of years, across vast stretches of the Pacific and Indian Oceans, it made it possible. And those voyages, those extraordinary, open ocean journeys, bring us naturally to the water stretching out in front of you now. Watch the shoreline for a moment. Notice the way the water pulls back, lays the sand bare and glistening, then rolls forward again in its slow, breathing rhythm. What you are watching is the tide, and it is one of the most powerful forces on the planet, driven not by wind or weather, but by the gravitational pull of the moon itself. As the moon orbits the Earth, its gravity gently tugs at the planet's oceans, drawing the water toward it in a subtle but enormous bulge. As the Earth rotates through that bulge, we experience it as the tide rising and falling, and on most coastlines around the world, this happens approximately twice a day, every single day, without interruption, without variation, and without any power on Earth being able to stop it. Most tropical islands experience what is known as a semi-diurnal tidal pattern, 2 high tides and 2 low tides within a single 24-hour period, each roughly 6 hours apart. But the range of that tide, how far the water rises and falls between its highest and lowest points, varies dramatically depending on where in the world you are. In some parts of the tropics, the tidal range is barely noticeable, a gentle foot or two of movement. In other places, the same gravitational force can push and pull the ocean by 30 feet or more. On your island, the tidal shifts are soft and unhurried, the water retreating only far enough to reveal a wide, pale arc of wet sand, and the shallow tide pools that the sea leaves behind as it goes. And it is in those tide pools that some of the most quietly magical creatures on Earth spend their days. Lower your gaze from the horizon and let it settle on the rocks at the water's edge, just beyond the reach of your hammock's gentle shadow. If you look carefully, if you move slowly, the way the island seems to ask you to move, you will find them. Starfish. Or more correctly, sea stars, since they are not fish at all, but rather members of the class Asteroidea, a group of marine invertebrates so ancient and so strange that they challenge almost every assumption we have about what an animal can be. There are roughly 2,000 known species of sea star distributed across the world's oceans, living at depths ranging from the shallowest tidal pools all the way down into the cold, dark abyss of the deep sea. But it is here, in the warm, sunlit shallows of the tropical coastline, where some of the most vivid and spectacular species make their home. One of the most extraordinary things about the sea star, and there is genuine competition for that title, is the way it moves. A sea star has no legs, no fins, no wings. What it has, running along the underside of each of its arms, are thousands of tiny structures called tube feet. Each tube foot is a small, muscular cylinder tipped with a suction pad, and the sea star operates them hydraulically, using a network of water-filled canals inside its body to extend, grip, and retract each foot in a coordinated wave of motion. The result is slow, achingly, peacefully slow, but it is relentless. A sea star moving across a tidal rock face is a study in quiet, unstoppable determination, and watching one navigate the gentle currents of a warm tropical pool, arms undulating softly, catching the light in shades of burnt orange and deep violet, feels less like watching an animal and more like watching the ocean itself think. Let that thought settle over you like the warmth settling into your skin right now. You are suspended between two palm trees that have outlasted empires. The tide is pulling at the water in front of you with the steady hand of the moon, 239,000 miles away. Somewhere in the shallows, a sea star is moving on 1,000 tiny feet toward something it has been moving toward all morning. And you, rocked gently by a breeze that has crossed thousands of miles of open ocean just to reach this particular island, this particular afternoon, you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Close your eyes for a moment, if you like. We're only just beginning. There is a particular quality to the light on a tropical island in the mid-morning. It is not the soft, apologetic light of a northern sunrise, feeling its way cautiously across a cold landscape. This light arrives with warmth and intention, pouring through the palm fronds above you in shifting, dappled coins of gold that move across your skin as the breeze turns the canopy overhead. The hammock has molded itself to you now. The ropes, or fabric, or woven cord, whatever cradles you in this particular moment, have found the shape of your body and decided to keep it. You are, in the most literal sense, being held. And the world around you is quietly, continuously alive. We left our first segment at the water's edge, watching the tide breathe and a sea star move in its ancient, unhurried way. Let's stay near the water a little longer, because the ocean in front of a tropical island is not simply a beautiful backdrop. It is a system of almost incomprehensible complexity, and even the most ordinary things it does carry stories inside them worth knowing. Take the color of the water itself. That vivid, luminous turquoise that makes tropical shallows look almost artificial, almost too beautiful to be real, is not simply a trick of light or a travel photographer's filter. It is the result of genuine physics. Water absorbs sunlight, but it does not absorb all wavelengths of light equally. Red and yellow wavelengths are absorbed quickly, within the first few meters of depth. Blue and green wavelengths, however, penetrate much deeper, and in shallow, clear water with a pale sandy or coral floor beneath, that blue light scatters back upward toward the surface and toward your eyes, producing the extraordinary spectrum of turquoise and aquamarine that makes tropical water look as though it is lit from within. The cleaner and shallower the water, the more vivid the effect. What you are seeing when you look out from your hammock at that glowing, impossible blue is not illusion. It is the ocean showing you exactly what it is made of. And what it is made of connects us to something even larger. The ocean is salt water, of course, but have you ever paused to consider where all that salt actually came from? The salt in the world's oceans has accumulated over billions of years through two primary processes. The first is the slow, patient weathering of rocks on land, where rainwater, slightly acidic due to dissolved carbon dioxide, erodes minerals from rock surfaces, and rivers carry those dissolved minerals, including sodium and chloride, downhill and eventually out to sea. The second source is the mid-ocean ridges, where seawater seeps down through cracks in the ocean floor, is superheated by the magma beneath, and rises back up as hydrothermal vents, leaching minerals from the seafloor rock along the way. This has been happening for so long, and on such a scale, that the world's oceans now hold an estimated 50 quadrillion tons of dissolved salt, enough, if it were all extracted and spread evenly across every continent, to bury every landmass on Earth under a layer of salt roughly 500 feet deep. The warm, gentle water lapping at the shore of your island carries inside it one of the longest ongoing geological stories on the planet. Now, while you rest and the tide continues its patient work, consider something moving beneath that turquoise surface. The tides we spoke of in the first segment are driven by the moon, but the moon does not work alone. The sun also exerts a gravitational pull on the Earth's oceans, considerably weaker than the moon's due to its much greater distance, despite its vastly larger size, and twice each month, during the new moon and the full moon, the sun and moon align in the same direction relative to Earth. When this happens, their gravitational forces combine, producing what are called spring tides. These are not named for the season but derive from an old Germanic word meaning to surge or to leap, and they result in the highest high tides and the lowest low tides of the month. Conversely, when the sun and moon are at right angles to one another, during the quarter moon phases, their forces partially cancel each other out, producing the gentler, more moderate neap tides. On your tropical island, the rhythm of spring and neap tides shapes the entire ecosystem of the shoreline, determining which creatures can live where, which rocks are exposed and for how long, and how deep the tide pools run on any given morning. Those tide pools, again. We cannot leave them alone, and honestly, why would we want to? The sea stars we found yesterday in our first quiet hour by the water are creatures that continue to reveal new layers of strangeness the longer you study them. One of the most remarkable things about them involves what happens when a sea star loses an arm, which, given that they share their habitat with predators, happens more often than you might imagine. Most sea stars are capable of regenerating a lost limb entirely, growing it back from the stump over a period of weeks or months with a patience that matches their pace of movement. But certain species, most famously some members of the genus Lynchia, go even further. For these sea stars, a single severed arm, entirely detached from the main body, carrying no heart, no brain, no central nervous system of its own, can regenerate an entirely new body. A complete, living sea star, grown from nothing but an arm. This process, known as autonomy followed by regeneration, means that a single sea star can effectively reproduce by losing a limb, and the two resulting animals are genetically identical. It is, in every meaningful sense, a form of cloning, performed quietly, in a tidal pool, in the warm shadow of a tropical island, without fanfare. Let that sit with you for a moment. Above you, the coconut palm fronds are casting their moving shadows across the sand, and if you have been watching the base of a palm tree long enough, you may have begun to notice something about the way it grows. Palm trees do not grow the way most trees grow. A typical broadleaf tree or conifer adds new layers of wood to its trunk each year. The rings you see in a cross-section of a felled oak are exactly that, one ring per year, gradually expanding the girth of the tree outward over time. Palms do not do this. A palm trunk is not made of wood in the traditional sense at all, but rather of densely packed fibrous vascular bundles running vertically through the stem. Once a palm trunk reaches its mature diameter, which happens very early in the tree's life, it does not grow wider. It only grows taller, adding new fronds from a single growing point at the very top called the apical meristem. This is why a palm trunk looks the same width at the bottom as it does near the crown. And it is also why, if that single growing tip is damaged or destroyed, the entire tree will die. There is no secondary growth point, no backup system, no way to reroute. The palm commits everything to that one upward reach. There is something almost poetic about that, on an island that seems to ask the same of its visitors: commit to this moment, this warmth, this complete surrender to the present. The breeze picks up briefly, carrying with it the faintly sweet, complex scent of the ocean, that smell that is equal parts salt and life and something older than either. What you are smelling, in part, is a compound called dimethyl sulfide, or DMS, produced by microscopic marine algae called phytoplankton as they are consumed by other tiny organisms in the water. DMS evaporates into the air, and its distinct, briny scent is the ocean's own signature, recognizable from miles away to anyone who has ever stood at a coastline and inhaled. Remarkably, seabirds have evolved to detect DMS from enormous distances, using it as a chemical trail to locate productive feeding grounds in the open ocean. That smell that feels like arriving home, like salt and memory and something you cannot quite name, is an actual biological signal, ancient and precise, written into the air above every warm ocean on Earth. Breathe it in. You are suspended in a hammock on a tropical island, and the world, in its extraordinary, unhurried way, is telling you everything, if you are quiet enough to listen. The palms are still swaying. The tide is still moving. The sea star in its pool is still, slowly, magnificently alive. And we have barely started. The morning has deepened into itself. The kind of morning that doesn't announce its passing, but simply continues, one warm breath at a time, until you realize that the light has shifted, the shadows have moved, and the world has quietly rearranged itself around you while you weren't paying attention. The palm fronds above catch and release the breeze in their familiar rhythm. The water at the shoreline glitters. Somewhere further down the beach, a bird calls once and then thinks better of it, and the silence that follows feels full rather than empty, the silence of a place that has everything it needs. You are still in your hammock. Good. Stay there. We have been spending our time so far in the broad strokes of this place, the physics of the water, the ancient lineage of the palms, the slow miracle of the sea star moving through its tidal pool. Now let us go a little deeper. Let us look more carefully, the way a long, unhurried morning invites you to look at things, at the details that reveal themselves only when you stop rushing past them. Begin with the sand beneath you, or rather, the sand at the edge of your vision, the pale crescent of beach curving away from where your hammock is strung. That sand is not simply ground-up rock. On a tropical island, a significant portion of the white, powdery sand you find on the beach is biological in origin, meaning it came from living things. Coral reefs, which we will return to in later segments, are constantly being broken down by a remarkable fish called the parrotfish, which uses its fused, beak-like teeth to scrape algae from coral surfaces. In the process, it ingests the coral rock itself, digests the organic material within, and excretes the remainder as fine white sand. A single large parrotfish can produce hundreds of pounds of sand each year. The soft, white beach beneath a tropical island hammock is, in no small part, made of parrotfish excrement, a fact that is either deeply charming or mildly unsettling, depending on your perspective, but undeniably extraordinary either way. Now look at the palms again, because they are never done surprising us. The root system of a coconut palm is unlike the deep taproot system of many large trees. Rather than driving one dominant root deep into the earth for stability and water, the coconut palm produces a dense, fibrous mass of thin roots that spread widely and relatively shallowly through the soil near the surface, sometimes extending outward as far as the tree is tall. This design serves the palm extraordinarily well in a coastal environment where the soil is often sandy, loose, and not particularly deep. The wide, shallow root network grips the ground across a broad surface area, distributing the force of wind rather than concentrating it at a single point. This is why coconut palms can bend dramatically in a tropical storm, bowing low, frond streaming horizontal, trunk curved almost impossibly toward the ground, and then straighten again when the wind passes, without being uprooted. They do not resist the storm. They move with it, and they survive it. There is a lesson tucked into that root system that has nothing to do with botany. And speaking of what lies beneath the surface, let us return to the water and consider what the tides are doing to the life on the seafloor just beyond the shoreline. The tidal movement we have been watching is not merely a rising and falling of water level. It is also a massive, rhythmic transportation system, moving nutrients, oxygen, larvae, and organic matter through shallow coastal ecosystems with every cycle. One of the most critical things the tide transports is something called particulate organic matter, tiny fragments of dead plant and animal material suspended in the water column. As the tide pushes inward over a shallow reef or sandy flat, it carries this organic material with it, depositing it into the crevices and surfaces where filter feeders such as mussels, sponges, and certain corals are waiting to collect it. When the tide retreats, it pulls waste products and carbon dioxide back out to sea. The tidal cycle is, in effect, the breathing mechanism of the coastal ecosystem, an inhalation and exhalation of energy that sustains thousands of species simultaneously, twice a day, every day, in perfect coordination with the moon. It is the moon's world, really. We are simply living in it. Down in the tide pools, the sea stars are navigating a world governed entirely by chemical signals. Sea stars have no eyes in any form we would easily recognize. Some species possess simple light-sensitive cells at the tip of each arm, capable of distinguishing between light and dark but not of forming images, but they navigate, hunt, and communicate through an exquisitely sensitive chemical detection system. The tube feet we discussed earlier are not only locomotion tools. They are also sensory organs, capable of detecting the chemical signatures of prey, predators, and potential mates dissolved in the surrounding water. A sea star hunting a mussel bed does not see its prey. It tastes the water for it, following a chemical gradient with the slow, certain patience of a creature that has been refining this technique for over 450 million years. The sea star lineage is genuinely that old. Fossil records place asteroid echinoderms in the Ordovician period, meaning sea stars were hunting along coastlines before fish had fully developed jaws, before the first plants had colonized dry land, before almost everything we think of as familiar life on Earth had appeared. Some things simply get it right early, and have no reason to change. The hammock you are lying in has its own ancient lineage, though considerably shorter than the sea stars. The hammock was invented by indigenous peoples of Central and South America, most likely the Mayan or Arawak communities of the Caribbean and coastal regions, somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000 years ago. It was originally woven from the bark of the hammock tree, from which it takes its name, and later from sisal plant fibers and cotton. When Christopher Columbus arrived in the Bahamas in 1492, he encountered hammocks being used throughout the Caribbean islands and brought the design back to Europe, where it was quickly adopted by the Spanish Navy. Sailors discovered that sleeping in a hammock on a ship dramatically reduced injuries from being thrown from a bunk in rough seas, and the hammock became standard naval bedding across European fleets for over 3 centuries. The gentle sway you are experiencing right now is the same motion that carried sailors across the Atlantic, the Pacific, and every ocean between, a comfort invented in the tropics, carrying a history as wide as the sea itself. Let that history hold you for a moment. The breeze moves through again. The coconut palms respond to it the way they always do, not with resistance, not with rigidity, but with that full, graceful, whole-body lean that makes them look less like trees and more like dancers who have been practicing the same movement for so long that it has become effortless. The fronds whisper against each other in a sound that is halfway between rain and applause, and then the breeze passes on, and the palms straighten, and the fronds settle, and everything is exactly as it was before, only more itself somehow. Out on the water, the tide is turning. Not dramatically, the tropics rarely do anything dramatically, preferring suggestion over declaration, but the angle of the light on the surface has changed slightly, the water's edge has retreated a few inches further, and the wet sand left behind is already drying at its margins, darkening to pale gold as the moisture leaves it. In the exposed pools, the sea stars sit motionless to the casual eye, though we know better now. They are tasting the water. They are moving, slowly, toward something. They have been doing this for nearly 500 million years. And you, in your hammock, cradled by a design older than the European world, shaded by a tree that survived the dinosaurs, listening to an ocean that has been building its saltwater story for 4 billion years, you are part of this too. A thread in a tapestry so large it can only be seen properly from this angle. From stillness. From exactly where you are right now. The afternoon is beginning its slow arrival. Not with any dramatic announcement, no sudden shift in temperature, no change in the quality of the birdsong drifting from somewhere inland. The tropics do not deal in dramatic transitions. Instead, the afternoon simply begins to suggest itself, the way a thought forms before you are quite aware you are having it. The light has thickened slightly, grown a shade warmer, turning the underside of the palm fronds from bright green to something closer to gold. The shadows on the sand have shifted their angles. The hammock moves in a slow, arcing pendulum beneath you, and the world continues its unhurried conversation with itself. You have been here long enough now that the island is starting to feel familiar. The particular sound of this beach's water, different from every other beach you have ever known, shaped by the specific curve of this shoreline, the depth of this particular shelf of sand, the size of these specific waves, has become the background of your thinking. Your breathing has synchronized with it, probably without you noticing. This happens. The ocean is patient about these things. Let us continue our exploration of this remarkable place, moving now beyond the shoreline and upward, into the air itself, because the air above a tropical island is as rich with story as anything happening in the water below. The trade winds blowing across your skin right now are among the most consistent and reliable wind patterns on the surface of the earth. They form as a result of the way the sun heats the atmosphere unevenly, intensely at the equator, less so toward the poles, creating a circulation of air that, combined with the rotation of the earth, produces steady winds blowing from the northeast in the northern hemisphere tropics and from the southeast in the southern hemisphere tropics. These are the trade winds, named not for commercial trade specifically, but from an older meaning of the word trade, signifying a regular, steady path or track. For centuries, European sailors relied on these winds almost entirely to navigate from the Old World to the Americas, timing their departures to catch the trades and riding them westward across the Atlantic with a predictability that made ocean crossing manageable. The wind on your face right now is the same wind that filled the sails of ships carrying the first Europeans to islands like this one, and the same wind that the indigenous peoples of the Pacific had understood and navigated by for thousands of years before that. That wind carries more than just history, though. It carries life. Coconut palms, for all their tropical permanence, were not always present on every island they now inhabit. The coconut fruit, technically a drupe rather than a true nut, is one of the most accomplished long-distance travelers in the plant kingdom. A coconut can fall from its parent tree, roll into the ocean, and float for up to 110 days on ocean currents while remaining viable for germination, capable of surviving thousands of miles of open sea travel before washing ashore on a new island and taking root. The husk surrounding the coconut is filled with buoyant, water-resistant fibers that keep it afloat, and the sealed interior protects the endosperm and embryo from saltwater intrusion during the entire journey. This extraordinary dispersal mechanism means that coconut palms effectively colonize the tropical coastlines of the Pacific, Indian Ocean, and Caribbean largely on their own terms, carried by the same currents and winds that carried your trade winds across the water. When you see a coconut palm growing at the very edge of a beach, its roots almost in the surf, it may well be the descendant of a coconut that arrived exactly that way, alone, on the ocean, navigating by current and chance. There is something quietly heroic about that. Down in the tide pools, our sea stars are navigating a world that is about to change with the turning tide, and they have a physiological tool for managing these transitions that is worth pausing to appreciate. Sea stars, like all echinoderms, are osmoconformers, meaning their internal body fluids maintain roughly the same salt concentration as the surrounding seawater, rather than actively regulating it as mammals do. When a tide pool becomes more saline as water evaporates in the tropical sun, or less saline as rainwater floods in, the sea star's body simply adjusts to match the new concentration, requiring no dedicated energy expenditure to maintain the balance. This is one of the reasons echinoderms are so well adapted to life in the constantly shifting chemistry of tidal environments, but it also means they are exquisitely sensitive to significant changes in ocean salinity, a fact that has become increasingly relevant as climate patterns alter rainfall and evaporation rates in tropical coastal zones. The sea star's ancient, elegant chemistry works beautifully in the world it evolved for. It is the world that is changing. Let your gaze drift upward into the palm canopy once more. The coconut palm produces flowers and fruit in a cycle that is, by the standards of the plant kingdom, extraordinarily generous and continuous. Unlike many fruit trees that flower seasonally, producing one harvest per year, a mature coconut palm produces new flower clusters called inflorescences roughly every month, meaning it is almost always simultaneously bearing flowers, young green coconuts, and mature brown coconuts at different stages of development. A single productive palm can yield between 50 and 200 coconuts per year depending on its variety and growing conditions, and it continues this production for decades. A healthy coconut palm reaches peak productivity at around 15 to 20 years of age and can continue bearing fruit for 80 to 90 years thereafter. The palm above your hammock, if it is mature, has likely been producing coconuts continuously since before you were born, and with reasonable fortune, will continue long after you are gone. It is not a tree that does things in bursts of enthusiasm. It is a tree that simply never stops. There is a word in Hawaiian, a culture that has lived intimately alongside palms, tides, and the open Pacific for over 1,000 years. The word is malama, and it means to care for, to preserve, to protect. It applies to the land, the ocean, the community, the self. Ancient Hawaiian communities practiced a resource management system called the ahupua, which divided each island into wedge-shaped sections running from the mountain peaks down to the ocean, ensuring that every community had access to the full range of the island's resources and was responsible for caring for each zone, from the upland forests to the coastal fisheries. This system recognized, centuries before modern ecology formalized the concept, that the mountain, the valley, the reef, and the ocean are not separate systems but a single continuous one, that what happens at the peak affects what lives at the shore. The tide pool. The palm. The trade wind. The hammock. All one thing, seen from different angles. The afternoon deepens. The water turns from turquoise to something richer, more layered, the color of depth rather than shallowness. Your hammock rocks. The palms lean into the wind and straighten again. And somewhere in the pool at the water's edge, a sea star moves on 1,000 quiet feet toward the next moment of its 500 million year story. We are all, in our different ways, doing exactly the same. Midday on a tropical island is its own particular kind of magic. The sun has climbed to its highest point and the light has lost its early softness, arriving now with a directness and intensity that turns everything it touches slightly luminous. The sand is almost white, the water almost mirror-bright at its surface, the palm fronds a green so saturated it seems manufactured. Shadows have shrunk back to the bases of the trees, gathered themselves in tight pools of shade, waiting. The air is warm and still in a way that feels less like absence of wind and more like the world pausing to collect itself before the afternoon trade winds return. In your hammock, you exist in a perfect microclimate. The shade above you filters the intensity of the sun. The fabric or rope beneath you allows air to circulate where a solid surface would hold heat. There is a reason humans in tropical cultures discovered the hammock and never stopped using it. Suspended above the ground, you are removed from the heat that radiates upward from sand and soil, cooled from below as well as above, and gently ventilated by whatever movement of air the day offers. The hammock is not simply a comfortable place to lie. In a tropical climate, it is one of the most thermally intelligent sleeping and resting surfaces ever devised. Before air conditioning, before electric fans, before any of the technological interventions we now rely upon to make heat manageable, the hammock was a genuine feat of passive climate engineering, elegant in its simplicity, profound in its effectiveness. Which makes this precisely the right moment to settle deeper into it and let the world continue its education. Let us begin midday with the water, because the ocean at high noon is doing something extraordinary that has nothing to do with tides. At the surface, under the direct pressure of the tropical sun, evaporation is occurring at its highest daily rate, seawater molecules gaining enough thermal energy to break free from the liquid surface and rise into the atmosphere as water vapor. This evaporation is one of the primary drivers of the global water cycle, and in the tropics, where solar energy input is greatest and ocean surface temperatures are highest, it occurs on a scale almost impossible to visualize. The tropical oceans are essentially a vast engine, converting solar energy into atmospheric moisture that eventually condenses into clouds, travels on upper-level winds to distant parts of the planet, and falls as rain that feeds the rivers and forests of entire continents. The Amazon rainforest, thousands of miles from any ocean, receives a significant portion of its rainfall from moisture that evaporated from the tropical Atlantic and was carried inland. Every breath of humidity in the air above your hammock is part of a circulation system that connects your small island to the entire planet's weather. You are, in the most literal meteorological sense, at the center of things. Speaking of what rises into the air, the coconut palm above you is engaged in its own version of this exchange, performing a process called transpiration that is less dramatic than ocean evaporation but no less essential to the ecosystem around it. Through thousands of tiny pores on the underside of its fronds called stomata, the palm releases water vapor into the surrounding air as a byproduct of photosynthesis, the process by which it converts sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water into the sugars that fuel its growth. A single mature coconut palm can transpire between 50 and 100 liters of water per day during peak growing conditions, water drawn up from the soil through its extensive root network, transported through the fibrous vascular bundles of its trunk, and released into the air through its fronds high above you. A grove of palms on a tropical island contributes meaningfully to the local humidity, creating a slightly cooler, moister microclimate in their shade than exists in the open sun beyond them. The palm is not simply drinking the island's water. It is recycling it back into the air, maintaining the very conditions that allow it and everything around it to thrive. It is, in this way, its own small weather system. Beneath the surface of the water beyond your shoreline, the midday sun is penetrating to depths that shift the behavior of the entire reef community. Many species of coral, the living architects of the reef structures that shelter so many of the creatures we have been discussing, contain within their own tissues microscopic algae called zooxanthellae, which are photosynthetic organisms that use the sunlight filtering down through the water column to produce sugars, sharing a portion of those sugars with their coral hosts in exchange for shelter and access to nutrients. This symbiotic relationship is the foundation of the entire coral reef ecosystem, and it is driven entirely by light. At midday, when sunlight penetration is at its deepest and most intense, the zooxanthellae within the coral are photosynthesizing at their peak rate, and the coral is at its most energetically productive. The reef, seen from above, may look static and still, a complex, colorful landscape of frozen forms. But at the cellular level, at noon on a clear tropical day, it is humming with photosynthetic activity, converting sunlight into biological energy that will ultimately feed thousands of species across the entire reef community. The sun is not just warming the water. It is powering an entire world beneath it. Our sea stars, meanwhile, are managing midday in their own characteristic way. In exposed tidal areas where midday sun can rapidly heat shallow pools to temperatures that would stress many marine organisms, some species of sea star display a behavior called arm curling, raising the tips of their arms upward and away from the hot substrate surface, reducing the area of their body in contact with the heated rock or sand and exposing less surface area to direct sunlight. It is a subtle behavior, easily missed by the casual observer, but it represents a form of behavioral thermoregulation, using posture and movement, rather than internal physiology, to manage body temperature. That a creature with no brain, no centralized nervous system, and no capacity for conscious decision-making as we understand it can nonetheless perform an appropriate response to thermal stress is a reminder that intelligence, in the biological sense, is a far broader and stranger category than we typically imagine. The sea star does not think about being too warm. It simply responds, elegantly and effectively, to what the world is doing. Sometimes that is enough. Sometimes that is everything. The palm fronds above your hammock are doing something at this exact moment that you can observe if you look carefully. In the still, intense heat of midday, with the wind temporarily quieted, many of the fronds have oriented themselves to minimize the surface area they present to the direct overhead sun, a passive response built into the structure of the frond itself, which unlike a broadleaf tree's foliage can angle and twist along its central rib to reduce solar exposure. This is one of the reasons palms are so well adapted to high-sun tropical environments where a broadleaf tree might suffer from excessive water loss or heat stress at midday. The palm's long, narrow frond design, with its parallel leaflets arranged along a central spine, is not simply aesthetically graceful, it is a masterwork of evolutionary engineering for precisely this climate, at precisely this hour. The right shape, in the right place, doing the right thing. Now consider something that connects all three of our subjects, the island, the tide, and the creatures of the shore, in a way that reveals how deeply interwoven this ecosystem truly is. The gravitational forces that drive the tides also have a measurable effect on the crust of the Earth itself. As the moon's gravity pulls the oceans upward, it also causes the solid rock of the planet to flex slightly, a phenomenon called the Earth tide or solid Earth tide, with the land actually rising and falling by as much as 20 to 30 centimeters twice a day in response to the same forces that move the ocean. On a coral island like many in the tropical Pacific or Indian Ocean, whose foundations are built upon ancient, accumulated reef structures atop a volcanic seamount, this twice-daily flexing of the Earth's crust contributes, almost imperceptibly, to the network of tiny fractures and water pathways through the rock that allow fresh water to percolate and pool in underground lenses beneath the island's surface. The same moon that moves the tide shapes the island's freshwater supply. Nothing here operates in isolation. Nothing acts alone. The afternoon is gathering itself now. The trade winds are beginning their return, arriving first as a softening of the stillness, then as a genuine movement of air through the palm canopy above. The fronds respond immediately, resuming their slow, sweeping conversation with the breeze. The shadow of the palm trunk stretches itself a little further across the sand. The water at the shore catches the returning wind and develops a faint surface texture, thousands of tiny wavelets writing something in a language older than any human alphabet. You breathe in. The ocean breathes out. Somewhere below the turquoise surface, in the quiet architecture of the reef, the coral is still photosynthesizing, still building, still accumulating, grain by microscopic grain, the living structure of this island's underwater world. The sea star in its pool has uncurled its arms as the sun angle shifts and the water temperature eases. The coconut palm above you is still transpiring, still drawing water upward from the sandy soil, still releasing it, molecule by molecule, into the warm island air. Everything here is in motion. Everything here is connected. And you, resting in the middle of all of it, suspended in your hammock at the midpoint of the day, are connected to it too, whether or not you are paying attention. But you are paying attention. That makes all the difference. Something shifts in the middle of the afternoon. It is not a dramatic shift, nothing on this island announces itself dramatically, but it is unmistakable once you notice it. The light, which at midday arrived straight down with such intensity and directness, has begun to travel. It comes now at an angle, sliding in beneath the edge of the palm canopy rather than pressing down through it, and the quality of it has changed from white to something warmer, something that turns the sand faintly amber and makes the water look as though it has been poured from a different vessel entirely. The shadows have returned, long, generous shadows that stretch eastward across the beach and lie flat and cool across the sand in a way that invites you to look at the landscape differently, to see its texture and depth rather than simply its brightness. The hammock is still holding you. It has been doing this all day without complaint, without effort, conforming to the exact weight and shape of you with a fidelity that no rigid surface can match. The ropes or fabric have warmed slightly in the parts where they catch the shifting sunlight, but where you rest against them the temperature remains comfortable, the airflow beneath you continuing its quiet, steady work. The afternoon trade winds have settled into their reliable rhythm now, a consistent, directional breath from the southeast or northeast depending on which side of the equator your island calls home, and the palms are leaning into it with the relaxed confidence of things that have done this 10,000 times before. Let the afternoon carry us deeper into the story of this place. We have spoken of the coconut palm at length, its roots, its fronds, its extraordinary fruit, but we have not yet spoken of the palm's relationship with time in the way that a careful observer of this island would eventually notice. The coconut palm, unlike most trees, does not produce annual growth rings in its trunk that allow us to determine its age by counting. Because it does not add wood in expanding annual layers, there is no internal record of its years in the way a cross-section of an oak would reveal. Instead, The age of a coconut palm must be estimated by other means, the number of frond scars visible along the trunk, which accumulate as old fronds drop away and leave a distinctive ring-shaped mark on the trunk's surface, or by knowledge of when the tree was planted. These scars, running in a spiral pattern up the length of the trunk, are the palm's own quiet autobiography, each ring representing a frond grown, matured, and released, each one a season recorded not in wood but in texture. Running your hand up a palm trunk, you are reading time itself, written in a language of surfaces rather than rings. The afternoon tide is now in its retreating phase, pulling the water back with that same patient authority it has demonstrated all day, and as it does, it exposes a zone of the shoreline that is perhaps the most biologically rich and dramatically changeable habitat on the island, the intertidal zone. This is the band of shore between the highest high tide mark and the lowest low tide mark, a strip of coastline that is alternately submerged and exposed with every tidal cycle. Nothing about living in the intertidal zone is easy. Organisms here must tolerate being underwater, then exposed to air and direct sunlight, then submerged again, managing dramatic fluctuations in temperature, salinity, and oxygen availability twice a day, every day, without the option of retreat. And yet the intertidal zone is among the most densely populated and species-rich habitats in the marine world, because the same tidal action that makes conditions harsh also delivers a constant, reliable supply of nutrients and oxygen that deeper, calmer habitats cannot match. Difficulty and abundance, in the intertidal zone, are inseparable. Life, as it turns out, does not simply occur despite difficulty. Very often, it occurs because of it. Our sea stars are intertidal specialists, and they have developed an approach to the zone's challenges that is characteristically unhurried and effective. When the tide retreats and a sea star finds itself exposed in a drying pool or on a wet rock surface, it can survive for several hours in air, provided the conditions are not excessively hot or dry, by slowing its metabolic rate and relying on the water retained within its body cavity. But the sea star's relationship with the intertidal is not merely one of endurance, it is one of dominance. Sea stars are apex predators within the tidal pool ecosystem, and their feeding behavior shapes the entire community around them. A famous ecological study conducted in the 1960s by biologist Robert Payne on the rocky coast of Washington state demonstrated that when sea stars were removed from an intertidal zone, the mussel population they had been controlling exploded, crowding out nearly every other species and collapsing the ecosystem's biodiversity dramatically. Payne coined the term keystone species to describe organisms like the sea star, whose influence on their ecosystem is disproportionately large relative to their own abundance. Remove the keystone, and the arch falls. The sea star in your tide pool is not simply an occupant of the ecosystem. It is one of the reasons the ecosystem exists in the form it does. A small, five-armed architect of the world it inhabits. The afternoon light, continuing its slow lean toward the west, is now falling directly on the face of the water just beyond the breaking waves, and the surface there is doing something beautiful, each small wavelet catching the low-angle light on its forward face and reflecting it as a brief, brilliant flash before the wave breaks and reforms. This flickering light on moving water is called sun glitter or sun glint, and it has a hypnotic quality that researchers studying attention and cognition have noted produces a mild but measurable reduction in cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, in people who observe it. Patterns of flickering natural light, particularly light on moving water or filtered through moving leaves, engage the visual cortex in a way that promotes what psychologists call soft fascination, a gentle, effortless form of attention that allows the mind to rest and recover from the directed, effortful concentration that modern life demands. Your hammock, your palms, your moving water, they are not merely beautiful. They are neurologically restorative, in ways that science is only beginning to measure and describe. The island was always a therapy. We are simply now beginning to understand the mechanism. Above the waterline, the trade winds that have been shaping this island's ecology and weather are also responsible for one of the most visually distinctive features of many tropical island palm groves, the characteristic lean of the trees. Coconut palms growing on windward shorelines are often visibly tilted in the direction the prevailing wind blows, their trunks curving away from the wind at an angle that can be quite pronounced. This lean is not simply caused by the wind pushing the tree over, however. It is the result of a process called phototropism combined with thigmomorphogenesis. The palm grows toward available light, which on a shoreline tends to be most abundant over the open water rather than inland, while simultaneously developing stronger, denser fiber on the windward side of its trunk in response to the mechanical stress of the wind. The lean is the tree's negotiated response to two simultaneous pressures, the pull of light and the push of wind, producing a posture that is uniquely its own, as individual as a signature. Every leaning palm on every tropical beach is the record of a private negotiation between light and wind, written in the curve of living wood. Now consider something about your hammock that connects it unexpectedly to the ocean just beyond it. The most traditional hammocks of the Caribbean and Central America were historically woven from plant fibers, cotton, sisal, or the bark fibers of various tropical trees, in an open, net-like weave pattern. This weave pattern, which allows air to circulate and prevents heat from building up against the body, is structurally almost identical to the weave patterns used by indigenous Pacific Island communities to construct fishing nets. The same geometry that cradles you in comfort was refined and understood by people who first applied it to the task of gathering food from the sea, the open mesh strong enough to hold weight, flexible enough to conform to irregular shapes, allowing water or air to pass freely through while retaining what it is meant to hold. The hammock and the fishing net are, in this sense, cousins, different applications of the same insight about how to use woven fiber intelligently in a tropical maritime world. Rest in that thought for a moment. You are lying in something that is also, in its deepest geometry, a net. The afternoon continues its slow, golden progress. The tide pool at the water's edge has shrunk further as the tide retreats, concentrating its community of organisms into a smaller volume of warming water. The sea stars sit at the pool's margins, arms slightly raised at their tips in that characteristic midday posture, patient and permanent seeming as stones. The palms above you continue their afternoon lean and sway. The trade wind carries the faint scent of the ocean, that dimethyl sulfide signature we recognized in our second segment, still present, still traveling, still connecting this small island to the enormous biological engine of the open sea. Everything here remembers what it is. Everything here has been doing this long enough that it no longer needs to think about it. Perhaps, after a day in this hammock, in this light, under these palms, with this tide and these sea stars and this ancient, unhurried wind, perhaps you are beginning to remember something too. Something quiet. Something that was always there. Something the afternoon, leaning warmly into your face, is very gently trying to say. The light has turned. There is no other way to describe what happens to a tropical island in the late afternoon. The light simply turns, the way a page turns, and everything that was one thing becomes something else entirely. The sand, pale and almost colorless at midday, is now a deep, warm amber. The water has shifted through its afternoon blues and settled into something richer, a layered spectrum of teal and gold and deep cobalt at the horizon, each color bleeding into the next with the confidence of something that has been doing this every day since before there were eyes to see it. The palm trunks glow faintly on their western faces. The fronds have darkened against the brightening sky behind them, becoming silhouettes of themselves, intricate and still. This is the golden hour. And on a tropical island, it lasts longer than an hour, stretching and deepening and refusing to hurry itself in the same unhurried spirit that has governed this whole day. You are still in your hammock. The ropes have told the story of your afternoon and the impressions they have made, but the feeling now is different from the feeling this morning, less of settling in and more of belonging here, as though the hammock and the island and the light have collectively decided that you are part of the landscape, at least for today, at least for this particular and irreplaceable hour. Let us spend it well. Begin with something happening directly above you, in the canopy of the palm. As the angle of the light shifts into its golden afternoon register, the photosynthetic activity in the palm fronds begins to slow. The stomata, those thousands of tiny pores through which the palm has been exchanging gases and releasing water vapor all day, begin to close as the light intensity decreases, reducing the rate of transpiration and photosynthesis simultaneously. This daily rhythm of opening and closing, driven by light levels, is regulated by specialized cells called guard cells that surround each stoma and change shape in response to light and internal chemical signals, swelling to open the pore when conditions are right for photosynthesis and contracting to close it when they are not. The palm does not have a nervous system. It has no brain, no circadian clock in any form we would recognize as such. And yet it tracks the passage of the day with a precision that rivals any timepiece, its cellular chemistry responding to the quality of light with a sensitivity developed over millions of years of tropical afternoons exactly like this one. The palm knows what time it is. It has always known. Out on the water, the late afternoon tide is approaching one of its critical transition points, and the creatures of the shallow reef and shoreline are responding to it with behaviors honed over evolutionary timescales. Many species of small reef fish time their feeding activity to coincide with specific phases of the tidal cycle, moving into shallower water on the rising tide when food is being carried inward, retreating to deeper reef structures on the falling tide when the shallows drain and exposure risk increases. This tidal choreography is so precisely tuned in some species that fish removed from their home reef and placed in a laboratory aquarium will continue to display active and inactive phases that correspond to the tidal rhythm of the location where they were caught, even in the absence of any actual tidal movement. The tide is not simply a condition these animals respond to. It has been written into their physiology, encoded in behavioral patterns that persist even when the tide itself is gone. The ocean has left its schedule inside them. Some rhythms, once learned deeply enough, become part of who you are. The sea stars in the tide pool are entering what will become their most active period of the day. As the intense heat of midday eases and the afternoon light softens, and as the returning tide begins to push cooler, oxygenated water back into the pools, the metabolic rate of the sea stars increases and their tube feet begin their patient, searching movement with renewed purpose. A sea star feeds in a manner that is almost surreally alien to our mammalian intuitions. When it locates a mussel or clam, it positions itself over the prey and uses the muscular suction of its tube feet to exert a slow, sustained pull on the two halves of the shell, pulling in opposite directions. A mussel's shell is held shut by powerful adductor muscles, and in a contest of pure strength, the mussel would win. But the sea star does not fight the mussel. It simply maintains its pull, steadily and without fatigue, for as long as it takes, sometimes hours, until the mussel's muscles tire and the shell opens by even a fraction of a millimeter. That fraction is enough. The sea star then does something remarkable. It extrudes its own stomach out through its mouth and into the gap between the shells, digesting the mussel externally before drawing the digested material back inside itself. It does not bring the food to its stomach. It brings its stomach to the food. Ancient, patient, and profoundly strange. Everything we love about the natural world. The golden light is now falling at such an angle that it catches the individual fibers of your hammock and illuminates them, turning the rope or fabric into something that looks briefly woven from light itself. This is as good a moment as any to think about the material beneath you more carefully, because the plant fibers that have historically been used to weave hammocks are as much a part of the tropical island story as the palms and the tides. Sisal, one of the most traditional hammock materials, comes from the agave sisalana plant, a succulent native to southern Mexico that was cultivated and spread throughout the Caribbean and tropical regions for its exceptionally strong leaf fibers. The indigenous communities of the Yucatan Peninsula had been harvesting and weaving sisal for centuries before European contact, using it for ropes, nets, and textiles, and it was the same fiber they used to weave the first hammocks encountered by Columbus. The strength of sisal fiber relative to its weight is extraordinary, comparable in some measures to fiberglass, which is why it was used for the hawsers and rigging of sailing ships throughout the age of sail. The same material that held a ship's mast in a storm once held, and in traditional hammocks, still holds, a sleeping human above the warm ground of a tropical island. Strong enough for a mast. Gentle enough for an afternoon nap. Consider now the horizon line in front of you, where the sky meets the sea in that precise, clean boundary that only exists over open ocean. The horizon you can see from a beach, at eye level, is closer than most people intuitively assume. Standing at the shoreline with your eyes at approximately 1.7 meters above sea level, the geometric horizon, the point at which the curvature of the earth causes the surface of the water to drop below your line of sight, is only approximately 4.7 kilometers away. From your hammock, slightly elevated above the ground, it is perhaps a few hundred meters further. Everything beyond that line, the ships, the other islands, the open ocean's infinite middle distance, is geometrically hidden by the curve of the planet itself. The horizon is not the edge of the world. It is the edge of your particular slice of it, determined by nothing more or less than the mathematics of a sphere and the height of your eyes above its surface. Which means the world is simultaneously much larger and much closer than the horizon makes it appear. The afternoon wind has shifted its character very slightly as the evening approaches, a phenomenon sailors have observed and relied upon for centuries. Sea breezes, which blow from the cooler ocean surface toward the warmer land during the day as the sun heats the land faster than the water, tend to ease and reverse direction in the late afternoon and evening as the land begins to cool and the temperature differential between land and sea diminishes and then reverses. This daily cycle of onshore and offshore breezes is a feature of tropical island life as reliable as the tides themselves, and indigenous maritime communities across the Pacific and Indian Oceans use their knowledge of these daily wind shifts as a navigation tool, setting out from an island in the morning on the offshore breeze and returning in the evening on the onshore breeze, timed as precisely as any modern schedule. The wind itself was the clock. The island was the destination. The breeze told you when to come home. Now lift your eyes to the palm fronds and watch them carefully in this particular quality of light. You will notice, if you watch long enough, that the fronds do not all move in exactly the same way even when the same wind passes through them. Each frond has its own resonant frequency, its own characteristic oscillation shaped by its specific length, weight, and the angle at which it emerges from the crown. The result is that a grove of palms in an afternoon wind produces not a single unified movement but a complex, overlapping choreography of individual responses to a shared stimulus. Scientists studying the structural dynamics of palm fronds have noted that this individual variation in frond movement is not a flaw in the palm's design but a feature. By responding to wind at slightly different frequencies, the fronds avoid reinforcing each other's oscillations in ways that could create destructive resonance in the trunk and crown. The palm grove's apparent randomness is, at the structural level, a precisely calibrated system of mutual interference. What looks like chaos is actually balance. The golden hour is deepening now, the light thickening from gold towards something closer to amber, the shadows on the sand going from long to very long, the water at the horizon catching a first, faint suggestion of the colors that will come with sunset. The tide pool is filling again, the returning water sliding silently over the sun-warmed rocks, and the sea stars are moving, slowly, magnificently, on their 1,000 tube feet, into the new water as it arrives, following it inward the way they have always followed it inward, since long before this island existed in its current form, since long before there were hammocks to lie in and sunsets to watch from them. The day is not over. Not yet. But it has begun, very gently, to prepare for its ending. And there is nothing to do but watch it happen, from exactly where you are, in the most comfortable position the island has yet offered you. Stay. The best light is still coming. The sun is close to the water now. Not touching it yet, there is still a finger's width of blazing light between the base of the sun and the line of the horizon, but the distance is closing with a slowness that seems almost deliberate, as though the sun is reluctant to leave and is taking its time about it. The sky has become something that no color chart has ever adequately named. There is orange, yes, and pink, and a deep coral that bleeds upward into violet at the zenith, and at the very horizon a band of pure, burning gold that makes the water below it look as though it has been set alight from within. The palm silhouettes are absolute against all of this, black and precise and utterly still in the momentary calm that sometimes falls just before the evening offshore breeze arrives. You are watching all of this from your hammock, which has now accompanied you through an entire tropical day. Morning, midday, golden afternoon, and now this, the hour that belongs to no part of the day and no part of the night, the hour that exists only for itself and asks nothing of you except that you be present in it. Be present in it. There is science happening in this sunset, and it is worth knowing. The colors you are seeing, the oranges and reds and golds that replace the blue and white of midday, are the result of a phenomenon called Rayleigh scattering, the same process responsible for the blue of the daytime sky, now operating under different geometric conditions. At midday, sunlight travels a relatively short path through the atmosphere to reach your eyes, and the shorter blue wavelengths of light scatter in all directions, flooding the sky with blue. At sunset, the sun is at such a low angle that its light must travel through a vastly longer slice of atmosphere to reach you, up to 40 times longer than at noon. Over that extended path, almost all of the blue wavelengths scatter away before they arrive, leaving only the longer red, orange, and gold wavelengths to complete the journey. What you are seeing is not the sun changing color. It is the atmosphere filtering, selecting, and delivering only the warmest frequencies of light, like a concert hall that has tuned itself to play only the lowest, most resonant notes as the evening arrives. The sky is not performing for you. But it would be forgivable to think that it is. The water in front of you is doing something at this hour that it does at no other time of day. As the surface temperature of the ocean begins to ease with the dropping of the sun, and as the offshore breeze starts its evening rotation, the surface tension of the water very slightly increases, a physical property of water that makes its surface behave almost like a flexible membrane. This increased surface tension at the ocean's surface in the calmer evening conditions is one of the reasons that the water appears so glassy and mirror-like at sunset, capable of reflecting the sky above it with such fidelity that the boundary between sea and sky seems to dissolve. Surface tension is the same force that allows certain insects to walk on water, that causes water to bead on a leaf, that pulls liquid into a droplet rather than spreading flat. In the ocean it operates on an enormous scale, and its subtle evening increase is enough to visibly calm the texture of the water's surface and turn it into the mirror that makes tropical sunsets look the way they do. The ocean becomes a second sky. The island floats between them. The coconut palms silhouetted against this second sky are preparing, in their slow cellular way, for the night ahead. As photosynthesis ceases with the failing light, the palm shifts its metabolic priorities from sugar production to sugar distribution. The carbohydrates produced throughout the day by the photosynthetically active fronds are loaded into the phloem, the palm's internal transport network, and moved downward through the trunk toward the roots and upward toward the developing fruits and growing crown, where they will be used for growth and stored for future energy needs. This process, called translocation, continues through the night and is in some ways more significant to the palm's long-term development than the photosynthesis itself. The making of sugar and the moving of sugar are two entirely different biological operations, and a palm that photosynthesizes abundantly but distributes poorly will not thrive. The palm, like any complex organization, depends not just on production but on distribution. It is the moving of resources, not merely their creation, that sustains the whole. A lesson that extends, perhaps, somewhat beyond botany. Down at the tide pool, the light is changing the behavior of everything within it. As the intense daytime light fades, many of the nocturnal organisms that have been sheltering in crevices and beneath rock overhangs throughout the day begin to stir. Certain species of small crab, various marine worms, and particular varieties of brittle star, close relatives of the sea stars we have been watching all day, begin to emerge from their daytime hiding places and move into the open water of the pool to feed. The tide pool at dusk is a different ecosystem from the tide pool at noon. populated by a different community of active animals conducting a different set of ecological transactions, sharing the same physical space but occupying it at different times in an arrangement ecologists call temporal partitioning. The pool does not have enough space or resources for all its inhabitants to be simultaneously active, so evolution has arranged their schedules so that they take turns, the day shift handing off to the night shift with a precision that requires no communication, no coordination, and no shared awareness between the participants. The tide pool runs itself. It always has. Our sea stars, which have been active feeders through the afternoon, will continue their slow and patient hunting into the evening hours, unbothered by the transition from day to night. Without eyes capable of image formation, the sea star has no particular relationship with light and darkness as conditions, it navigates by chemistry and touch regardless of the illumination, and the fading of the day simply means the departure of the species it cannot eat and the arrival of others it can. The evening brings the brittle stars out from their crevices, and certain sea star species will prey upon them, following their chemical trail through the darkening water with the same unhurried inevitability they bring to everything else they do. A sea star hunting in a tide pool at dusk is one of the most ancient predatory acts on Earth, a behavior pattern essentially unchanged since the Paleozoic era, playing out in the gathering dark beside a beach where a human lies in a hammock watching the sky turn colors. Time, on an island like this, feels less like a line and more like a series of overlapping circles. The hammock beneath you has now passed through an entire day, and its relationship with your body has become remarkably intimate. Research into prolonged hammock use has found that the gentle, continuous micro-adjustments the body makes to maintain balance and comfort in a flexible, suspended surface actually engage a continuous low-level activation of the deep postural muscles of the core and back, muscles that in a rigid bed or chair simply switch off entirely. This continuous gentle engagement, too subtle to feel like exercise, too mild to cause fatigue, is thought to contribute to the sense of physical ease and absence of stiffness that many people report after resting in a hammock versus a flat surface. The hammock is not a passive support. It is in quiet, continuous dialogue with your body, making small adjustments and inviting small adjustments in return, maintaining a conversation in the language of weight and balance and tension that has been going on, below your conscious awareness, all day. Your body has been listening. It has been answering. You simply did not notice. Now look at the horizon line once more, because something extraordinary is about to happen, and it happens only at this precise moment, only in the seconds immediately after the last sliver of the sun drops below the horizon on a clear day over open ocean. It is called the green flash, and it is real, not myth, not legend, not the invention of romantics who have spent too long at sea. As the sun sets over clear ocean air, the atmosphere acts as a prism on the final arc of sunlight, refracting different wavelengths of light at slightly different angles. The red and orange wavelengths disappear first, below the horizon. The green wavelengths, refracted slightly more steeply, linger for a fraction of a second longer, and in that fraction of a second, before the blue and violet wavelengths scatter away into the sky, a brief, intense flash of green light appears at the exact point where the sun has just disappeared. It lasts for perhaps 1 or 2 seconds. It requires a clear horizon, clean air, and eyes that are already looking at exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. Most people never see it. Not because it is rare, but because most people have already looked away. The offshore breeze has arrived now, cool and steady, moving from the land toward the sea as the island's surface gives up its daytime heat into the darkening air. The palms lean gently into it, their silhouette swaying against a sky that has deepened from gold to rose to the first pale, translucent violet of approaching night. The stars will be extraordinary here, far from any city light, on an island ringed by open ocean. The night sky above a tropical island is one of the most dramatic visible from the surface of the earth, the Milky Way sometimes bright enough to cast a faint shadow. But that is for the next hour. For now, the hammock holds you in the last of the light. The tide breathes. The sea star hunts. The palm distributes its day's work of sugar through its quiet interior channels. The green flash, if it came, has come and gone in the second you may or may not have been watching. The day is folding itself away. And the night, warm, starlit, fragrant with ocean and flowering things, is opening. The night has arrived without ceremony. There was no single moment of transition, no switch thrown, no curtain drawn, just the slow, inevitable deepening of the sky from violet to indigo to a darkness so complete and so generous that it feels less like the absence of light and more like the presence of something else entirely. Something older. Something that was here before the sun rose this morning and will be here long after it rises again tomorrow. The stars are extraordinary. That is the only word for it, and even that word is insufficient. Away from any city, away from any artificial light source, on an island surrounded by open ocean on every side, the night sky above you is not the polite scattering of bright points that urban dwellers know. It is a structure, layered, dense, three-dimensional in a way that makes the word sky seem too small for what you are looking at. The Milky Way stretches from one horizon to the other in a river of light so bright that it casts a faint, soft luminescence on the sand below and gives the palm fronds above you a ghostly silver edge. You are looking, in a very real sense, at the galaxy you live inside, a view of your own home from within it, a perspective available only to those willing to lie still in the dark long enough to let their eyes fully adapt. You are, of course, in exactly the right position for this. Let the night begin its own particular education. The stars above this tropical island were navigation tools long before they were objects of scientific study. The Polynesian and Micronesian navigators who settled the Pacific, crossing thousands of miles of open ocean in outrigger canoes without instruments, charts, or any of the technological aids we now consider essential to ocean travel, used the rising and setting positions of specific stars as a compass of extraordinary precision. Different stars rise at different points on the eastern horizon and set at different points on the western horizon, and these positions are fixed and reliable year-round for stars close to the celestial equator. A Polynesian navigator could determine their latitude by the height of specific stars above the horizon, their direction of travel by the rising and setting points of star paths they had memorized since childhood, and their proximity to land by the behavior of ocean swells, wind patterns, cloud formations, and the flight paths of birds. This body of knowledge, called wayfinding, was so sophisticated and so complete that some Pacific Islander communities navigated reliably between islands separated by more than 2,000 miles using nothing but their trained perception of the natural world around them. The ocean was not a barrier to these people. It was a road, and the stars were its signposts. The palms that line your beach were, as we noted in an earlier segment, often the first thing a returning navigator would see of a low island, the tall silhouettes of coconut palms visible from the sea long before the island itself rose above the horizon. On many Pacific atolls, barely elevated above sea level, the fringe of coconut palms is the island's most visible feature from a distance, and navigators specifically looked for their distinctive crown shape against the sky as confirmation that land was near. The palm was not merely a food source or a building material for these communities. It was a landmark, a beacon, a sign written in the landscape that said, "Home is here, approach now, you have arrived." Below the stars, the tide is conducting its night business. The nocturnal tidal cycle is identical in its mechanics to the daytime cycle, the same gravitational forces, the same semi-diurnal rhythm, the same rise and fall, but its effects on the shoreline ecology are distinctly different because the community of organisms active at night is, as we touched upon in our previous segment, substantially different from the daytime community. Among the most remarkable of the night tide's visitors is the bioluminescent plankton that in certain conditions makes the breaking waves glow with a cool, blue-green light. This phenomenon, one of the most breathtaking natural spectacles on Earth, is produced by single-celled dinoflagellates, microscopic marine organisms that produce light through a chemical reaction involving an enzyme called luciferase acting on a compound called luciferin. When disturbed by the mechanical energy of a breaking wave, swimming fish, or a hand dragged through the water, the dinoflagellates flash their blue-green light as a defensive response. The sudden illumination startles or deters predators, and in some cases attracts larger predators that will consume whatever is disturbing the dinoflagellate. The ocean lighting up beneath your feet is not magic. It is a microscopic organism's alarm system, operating on a scale visible to the naked eye. The night ocean, in the right conditions, defends itself with light. The sea stars in the tide pool are invisible in the darkness unless you bring a light to find them, but they are there, moving, hunting, conducting their ancient business in the same water that is now reflecting the stars above it. There is a species of sea star found in the tropical Indo-Pacific called the crown-of-thorns starfish, Acanthoster plancy, that deserves a mention here because of its extraordinary and complex role in the reef ecosystem. Unlike most sea stars, the crown-of-thorns feeds specifically on coral polyps, everting its stomach over living coral tissue and digesting it externally, the same feeding mechanism we described in segment 7, but applied to an organism that forms the architectural foundation of the entire reef. In normal population densities, the crown-of-thorns is simply another component of the reef community, its coral predation creating patches of cleared substrate that allow new coral species to colonize and increasing biodiversity. But when population outbreaks occur, triggered by nutrient enrichment of coastal waters, overfishing of the sea star's natural predators, or other disturbances, a single crown-of-thorns outbreak can consume vast areas of living reef in a matter of months. The same organism that in balance contributes to reef diversity becomes in excess a force of reef destruction. Balance is not a passive state. It requires the continued presence of all its components. The hammock has taken on a different character in the night. The temperature has dropped enough to make the air feel comfortable rather than warm, and the darkness has removed the visual complexity of the daytime scene, simplifying the world to a few essential elements: the stars above, the sound of the water, the movement of the palms in the offshore breeze, the soft pressure of the hammock beneath you. Sensory deprivation researchers have found that the reduction of visual input in darkness causes the other senses to sharpen and become more discriminating. You can hear things now that the bright, busy afternoon obscured, smell things that the heat of midday volatilized into invisibility, feel the texture of the air against your skin in a way that daylight somehow prevents. The night is not a diminished version of the day. It is a different sensory world, equally rich, offering information and experience unavailable in the light. The island at night is not the island you arrived at this morning. It is a different place wearing the same geography. Consider the moon, which is rising now above the eastern horizon, if we have chosen the right night, a nearly full moon, enormous and orange-amber at the horizon in the same atmospheric refractive effect that colors sunsets, gradually whitening and shrinking in apparent size as it climbs. This moon is doing what it has always done, pulling at the ocean below, organizing the tides, governing the rhythms of countless species whose reproductive cycles, feeding behaviors, and migration patterns are synchronized to the lunar calendar. The coral on the reef just beyond your shoreline spawns in massive, synchronized events timed to specific lunar phases, typically the nights following a full moon in late summer or autumn, releasing billions of tiny egg and sperm bundles simultaneously into the water column in an event so coordinated across species and so visually dramatic that it has been called the ocean's equivalent of a blizzard. The moon does not merely illuminate the night. It orchestrates the reproduction of the reef. Now consider what the night wind is carrying to you. The offshore breeze that began at sunset has continued through the evening, carrying the sense of the island's interior outward over the water, the green, slightly sweet smell of palm vegetation, the mineral earthiness of warm sand releasing its daytime heat, and something floral that intensifies after dark. Many tropical flowering plants are night blooming, having evolved to attract nocturnal pollinators, moths, bats, and certain beetles, by releasing their fragrance specifically in darkness when visual signals are unavailable. The night-blooming cereus, various tropical jasmines, and the extraordinary queen of the night cactus flower are all examples of plants that have entirely inverted the typical flowering strategy, holding their fragrance back through the bright daylit hours and releasing it only when the sun goes down, flooding the night air with a scent that can carry for extraordinary distances. The fragrance reaching you now in your hammock is not ambient, it is a targeted biological signal, designed to travel through darkness and find what it is looking for. Something about that, on a night this beautiful, feels appropriate. Look up one more time at the stars before we close this segment. There is a constellation rising above the palm fronds to the south, in the southern hemisphere tropics. The Southern Cross, crux, is one of the most reliable navigational markers in the sky, used by Pacific navigators as a pointer to the south celestial pole in the same way northern hemisphere navigators use the North Star. In the northern hemisphere tropics, the North Star, Polaris, hangs low above the northern horizon at a height above the horizon that corresponds almost exactly to your latitude. A navigator measuring the angle of Polaris above the horizon would know their latitude to within a fraction of a degree. The sky above this island is a coordinate system, a map, a calendar, and a clock all at once, and it has been providing this service, free of charge, to every creature capable of reading it, for as long as there have been islands to navigate toward. The stars do not care whether you understand them. They are there either way. But understanding them, or at least knowing that they carry this history, this utility, this extraordinary depth of meaning for the people who came before you to this same warm shoreline, makes the act of lying in a hammock beneath them feel like something more than rest. It feels like participation. Like belonging, briefly, to something ancient and ongoing and immeasurably larger than any single night, any single island, any single person suspended in a hammock between two palm trees under a sky full of stars. The tide breathes. The bioluminescent waves flash their cold blue light. The sea stars hunt. The coral waits for the moon's instruction. The palms distribute their day's sugar through the quiet dark of their trunks. And you watch the stars. And the stars, in their way, watch back. The night is at its deepest point. Not its darkest. The moon has climbed high enough now to lay a broad, trembling path of silver across the water, and the stars have that particular intensity they reach only in the small hours, when the atmosphere has settled and steadied and the light from distances incomprehensible to the human mind arrives at your eyes with almost no interference. The palms stand in their moonlit stillness, neither swaying nor entirely still, but moving in that barely perceptible way that makes them seem less like trees and more like breathing, like the island itself is breathing through them, slowly and deeply, the way you breathe when you are in the most restful part of sleep. You are still here. Of course you are still here. Where else would you be? The hammock beneath you has long since stopped being something you are lying in and has become, for tonight at least, simply where you are, as natural and unremarkable as the sand, the palms, the water, the stars. The body has a remarkable capacity for adaptation, for accepting its circumstances so completely that novelty becomes familiarity and familiarity becomes home. The island has done this to you, gently and without your noticing, over the course of this long and extraordinary day. Let us spend the last of it together. Begin with something happening beneath the water right now, in the reef just beyond the shoreline, invisible in the dark except where the moonlight penetrates the shallows and illuminates the sandy floor in shifting, liquid patches of silver. The coral reef, which we have mentioned throughout this journey but not examined as closely as it deserves, is one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on the face of the earth. Covering less than 1% of the ocean floor, coral reefs are home to an estimated 25% of all known marine species, a concentration of biological diversity with no parallel on land except perhaps the tropical rainforest. The reef surrounding your island has been building itself for thousands of years, each generation of coral polyps depositing a calcium carbonate skeleton that becomes the foundation for the next generation, accumulating centimeter by centimeter into the complex, three-dimensional architecture that houses this extraordinary community. A coral reef is not simply a habitat. It is a city, built by its own inhabitants, over timescales that make human construction seem instantaneous. And like any city, it is at its most mysterious and alive at night. The coconut palm above you is conducting, even now in the deepest hours of darkness, one of the most quietly remarkable chemical processes in the plant kingdom. The sugars translocated downward through the trunk during the evening hours accumulate in the base of the palm and in its roots, where they undergo fermentation processes in the presence of naturally occurring microorganisms in the soil, producing, among other compounds, small quantities of ethanol and various aromatic organic compounds that give the base of an old coconut palm a distinctive, faintly sweet, yeasty smell that is unmistakable to anyone who has spent time on a tropical island and paid close enough attention. This same biochemistry is the basis of toddy, a traditional fermented drink made by collecting the sap from the cut flower stalks of coconut palms, which has been produced across South and Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands for thousands of years. The coconut palm, even in its downtime, even in the middle of the night when no one is watching, is quietly fermenting, quietly transforming, quietly producing something that humans discovered long ago could be both sustaining and celebratory. The tree that gives everything gives it at all hours. The tide is at its lowest ebb of the night now, the water pulled back to its most retreated point before the cycle begins its return. In the fully exposed intertidal zone, revealed by the tide's withdrawal, something extraordinary is happening that few people ever witness because it requires being awake and attentive at this particular hour on a shoreline far from city light. The exposed rock surfaces and sand flats of the low intertidal zone are alive with movement. Crabs, small fish left temporarily stranded in isolated pools, marine worms emerging from their burrows into the damp air, and various mollusks extending their soft bodies to graze on the film of algae coating the wet rocks. The low tide at night is the intertidal zone's most exposed and most vulnerable moment, but also, paradoxically, one of its most biologically active, a brief window when the zone's nocturnal community takes full advantage of the exposed surface before the returning water reshuffles the entire arrangement. The sea never actually stops. It simply changes what it is doing. Our sea stars, faithful companions through this entire day and night, are approaching the end of their most active feeding period. As the tide prepares to turn and begin its return journey up the beach, some species of sea star display a behavior that marine biologists have termed tidal following, moving toward the retreating water's edge as the tide drops and following the advancing water as it returns, essentially tracking the tide itself rather than waiting passively for conditions to change around them. This active engagement with the tidal cycle requires a form of environmental awareness that, in an animal without a brain, continues to fascinate researchers. The mechanism appears to involve a combination of pressure sensing, detecting the change in water pressure as depth changes, and chemical sensing of the specific compounds carried in the advancing tidal water versus the stagnant water of isolated pools. The sea star follows the tide not because it decides to, but because the tide carries chemical and physical signals that activate its tube feet and orient its movement. The decision, such as it is, happens in the water itself. The ocean is always the intelligence behind the sea star's choices. Now, as the first suggestion of dawn begins to appear, not yet light, not even close, but a barely perceptible softening of the darkness at the eastern horizon, a slight reduction in the depth of the black that only becomes apparent when you have been watching that horizon long enough, consider what a day on this island has meant. Not philosophically, but physically, biologically, cosmically. The Earth has completed almost exactly one full rotation on its axis. The Moon has moved approximately 13 degrees further along its orbit. The tide has completed nearly 2 full cycles of its inhalation and exhalation. The palms above you have produced, through photosynthesis, a quantity of sugar sufficient to grow new fronds, support new fruit development, and maintain the living tissue of an organism that has been doing this for decades. The sea stars have fed, moved, regulated their chemistry, and contributed to the ecological balance of a tidal community whose origins stretch back nearly 500 million years. And you have rested. Properly, deeply, completely rested. That is not a small thing. In a world that has come to treat rest as a deficit and busyness as a virtue, a full day of genuine, attentive stillness in a place like this is an act almost radical in its simplicity. The hammock you have been lying in since morning was not, despite appearances, a passive choice. It was an alignment with something, with the rhythm of tides and the patience of palms and the ancient, unhurried wisdom of creatures that have survived every extinction the earth has attempted precisely because they never confused movement with progress. The horizon is definitely lighter now. Not pink, not gold, just lighter, a shade of deep blue that is different from the night blue above it, separated by a line so precise it might have been drawn. This pre-dawn light, called astronomical twilight, occurs when the sun is between 12 and 18 degrees below the horizon and its light begins to scatter in the upper atmosphere long before the sun itself appears. It is the sky waking up before the star that illuminates it arrives. The stars nearest the horizon are beginning to fade, not because they are gone but because the atmosphere is brightening enough to wash them out, the same way a quiet conversation becomes inaudible when the room fills with sound. The Milky Way is still visible at the zenith, but only just, a ghost of the river of light that crossed the whole sky an hour ago. The palms are becoming visible again as individual forms rather than silhouettes. You can see the texture of the fronds now, the individual leaflets distinguishable, the coconuts hanging in their clusters at the crown catching the first gray pre-dawn light on their rounded surfaces. The beach below your hammock has returned to its familiar pale color, the moonlight no longer the only illumination but now joined by this growing ambient light from a sun still hidden below the horizon. The wet sand at the waterline, the tide is returning now, advancing up the beach in its quiet, inevitable way, catches the pre-dawn light and holds it, gleaming faintly. And in that gleaming wet sand, at the very edge of the returning tide, something moves. A sea star, one of our sea stars, perhaps the very one we have been watching through the pools and the afternoon and the night, is at the waterline, half submerged in the returning wave, its 5 arms spread flat against the sand, its tube feet working in their thousands against the substrate, following the tide inward exactly as we described. The wave covers it, retreats, covers it again. In the pre-dawn light it is briefly visible between waves, dark red, perhaps, or deep orange, the color indeterminate in this gray, tender light, and then a larger wave comes and covers it completely and it is gone, back into the water from which it came, carried home on the tide it has been following all night. The oldest animal on this beach, going home with the dawn. There is a concept in Japanese aesthetics called mono no aware, often translated as the bittersweet awareness of impermanence, the gentle sadness of things passing, the beauty that exists specifically because it does not last. It is felt most acutely, the Japanese say, at moments of transition, cherry blossoms falling, seasons changing, a day ending. A dawn arriving on a tropical island, after a full night in a hammock, as the stars fade and the tide returns and a sea star disappears into the advancing water and the palms begin to catch the first actual color of sunrise on their eastern faces, pink now, definitively pink, the sky above the horizon warming rapidly through rose toward the gold that means the sun is almost here. This is mono no aware made landscape. This is the beautiful, passing thing that you are inside of right now. The sun breaks the horizon. Not gradually, the final approach is always faster than the long preparation suggests. One moment there is a burning point of light at the horizon's edge, then a crescent, then a half circle, then the full disk is free of the water and the world is transformed in seconds from the muted, tender colors of dawn into the full, saturated brilliance of a new tropical morning. The sand goes white. The water goes turquoise. The palm fronds blaze green against a sky that is already, impossibly, as blue as it was yesterday at this hour, as blue as it was the day before that, as blue as it has been every morning since this island first rose from the ocean and the first seeds arrived on the first currents and the first palms took root in the first sand. The day begins again. The tide breathes in. The sea star, somewhere beneath the turquoise surface, moves on its 1,000 quiet feet toward whatever comes next. The coconut palm above you opens its stomata to the new light, begins the ancient chemistry of turning sunlight into life, begins the patient work of another day. The trade winds, faithful and consistent, are already stirring at the eastern horizon, beginning their daily journey across the surface of the ocean toward this island, toward this beach, toward these palms, toward the hammock where you have spent a full revolution of the earth in quiet, attentive, profoundly ordinary wonder. You do not need to move yet. The hammock will hold you a little longer. It always does. This island, this tide, these palms, these ancient five-armed creatures of the shallow water, they have been here since before you arrived and they will be here long after you leave, conducting their patient, interconnected, extraordinary lives in the same rhythm they have always kept. But for one full day, from one sunrise to the next, you were part of it. You were suspended in the middle of it. You paid attention to it. And that, in a world that moves so fast it forgets to look, that is everything. Rest now. The ocean will keep watch.